Hello, good morning. Hello.
Morning, sir.
Hi, good morning. Ni Carl. Where are you, Carl? Pagsanhan? Carl.
Bulacan po ako.
Ay, Bulacan ka. You're there in Bulacan?
Yes po.
Malakas ang converge yata dyan, ano?
Di po masyado.
Or PLDT?
PLDT po.
PLDT. Okay. So, nauna si John Denver kanina. Anyway, let's have a check. So, wait. I'll just lose my full screen. Ilan tayo? 29. So, picture taken ng 34. Okay. So, for the purposes of attendance, check. Print screen. Shot. Ayun. Tapos na. So, that is now how we would do our attendance. Anyway, PMDD is sending me yung attendance or who are attending and the number of minutes that you're attending. That is, of course, to check whether really mag-attend yung bata. So, again, for the requesting for yung mga ano yun, mga video, medyo mabigat rin pala, no? So anyway, I'll try to upload it later kasi nasa what you call email. So link na lang yata ang ibibigay, ano? So anyway, I'll just check on it kung pwede na. Some of you wala, akala ko chat. So, anyway, for our activities for this week. On Thursday, I might give you a what you call basic work again, a continuation. It's just it's not really just a sick work, but it's a sick work that would cover almost everything. So it's a comprehensive one, wherein it would go beyond what you have learned. But something you have learned, so para makabawi kayo. So mas mabigat siguro mga 60 points, 100 points, ganun. So it would more or less help you out in possibly making doing or getting more of your points for your class standing. So it can be on Thursday. I was thinking of a Thursday so that on the Friday lecture we can also discuss it. We discuss it to, or I can give it on a Friday. Anyway, it's just for you to what to work on so that you would more or less have a review for the subject. So that was my intention. So if I give on a Thursday, we can review it on a Friday. Or I can give it on a Friday and of course let you do the rest of it. Uh, the other thing is of course your scheduled exam, as I've said, is in 8:30. So I think it was on the 23rd, kung hindi ako magkamali. Did we make 23rd, ano? Prelim for 8:30 is 23. Actually, you have to schedule 23, 24, but we'll do the first one para matapos na. And then, of course, ano pa? Hmm, wala namang announcement. Yung some of you ay, ewan ko kung natuloy yun. Those with reserve status were removed. Ano? According to Ma'am Yuri, hindi naman na-update kasi yung akin. That's why I was hesitant to do it. But I don't know kung na-remove, di wala na siya ngayon. So if you are still on a reserve status, good for you. I think the problem is providing the accounting with the receipt of payment for your tuition. So yun lang naman ang announcement. So I hope from our previous quiz, if you will notice, merong na plus 5, those who submitted on time, yung nadadidaktan, meron si Miss Bulsyo, may nadidak kasi the reason is late. So we have a cut-off time, and beyond that, as I've said, an hour, 2 hours is too long already. So those are the things that we have to train ourselves. Ano? I don't like doing it. Mas madaling nga ipasa lahat para walang problema. Pero kung may natutunan, yun lang ang may problema. And as I've said, this is one thing that you have to also go by, the discipline. And remember, the board exam, as I've said, has not totally changed. It's still the same because there is no such thing as, meron nag-request. Ewan ko kung si John yun, sabi. Wala bang points yung correct solution, wrong answer? You know, when you take the board exam, very specific yan. Kaya nga engineering ang kinuha natin because it's specific, just to address it. Meron, ayon ko kung ito yung klase na nag-request ng recording. As I've said, it's quite, I have to download it or give you na lang yung link. I will try to do that. Learn to do that actually. Kasi kung i-download ko, magiging pupunta sa RAM ko na naman yan. Tatagal. Ang tagal mag-download ng mga video na 44 minutes. So anyway, I will try to see on how to do that. So kung may upload ko, na-upload ko yata yung klase ko ng Soil 2. So anyway, I will try my best to do that within this. But definitely, expect muna yung mga sheet work to happen. And then, may comment pa ako kasi merong mga nagsasubmit later on, diagram. Sabi ko nga, integral po ang solution sa diagram. Okay? If I might be reminded, nakalagay dyan sa instruction, no diagram, no credits, or no solution in diagram, no credit. So, please, I might be relaxed now, but in the coming days, especially for the evaluation of your prelim exam, definitely no solution, no credit. Okay? So it also includes diagram. Ilagay niya nga R1, R2. Hindi ko naman alam R1, R2. Hindi ko naman alam yung positioning niya. So if you have noticed, like the trapezoid, triangular, dalawa, R1, R2. Pwede yung isa, rectangle at saka triangle. So, different, ano? You have to show me. So, we're getting to knowing each other. Anyway, it's only prelim, medyo fun yan. But definitely, merong incentive and disincentive. So, you have to really do it in a way na medyo parang professional naman tayo. Ano? So, hindi na pwede yung mga rason, mga ali-alibay ng mga yan, hindi ko ma-consider because I really have to be considerate of things. Ano? Pero, of course, I have to see to it also na patas. Ano? That everything is done equally and applied to all of you. So what I do in one class, I do for all my classes. So if I pass yung 70 ang grade, lahat na 70 papas ako, irregardless. So that's how I do my thing. Ano? Very consistent, dapat consistent po tayo. Pero, of course, you have to do your part. Ganun. Okay? So, for today, sunod ko, taga-kon tayo. Si Carl, ano? Carl, sabihin mo kung nakikita yung presentation natin. So, I will be...
Ito, sir.
Yan, thank you. O, ang layo pa, Bulacan. Yung iba kasi, I know you are in your home provinces. That is one thing also, I don't know. Baka next coming SEMS, ano? Ibubukas na ang ekonomiya, bagong presidente, siyempre, iwan ko lang. Kung mas cautious or, siyempre, pera ang kailangan, ekonomiya ng bayan. So, balancing it will be a problem. So, Carla, tignan mo kung makikita mo kasi hindi ko na nakikita. Sumasakit ng mata ko. Okay. Thank you, people of the world. Carl, can you see the presentation or is it moving now? Kita na. Yan.
Kita na po, sir.
Kita na. Thank you. Okay. Umutan. Anyway, I was just scrolling up for the reason of going over ano yung coverage. pero just to answer that question, our coverage start from Module 1 to Module 2. And partly, I will only discuss Module 3. Module 3 is the equilibrium of a force system. So, when you talk of equilibrium, it deals with a lot of things. And one of what statics deals with is a condition. Ano? It's a condition called equilibrium. Ano ba yung equilibrium na sinasabi? So, in detailed form, it is the equilibrium of a force system. So, before you become a good designer, bago kang mag-design dyan, the first thing that you have to do is to be able to analyze. That's why in statics, this subject, it is not about memorizing solution. Not anymore. Ano? It's not memorizing solution. It is actually developing your analytical frame of mind. So when you say analytical, you need to analyze. Ano? Before, as I've said, before you can start designing, the first thing that a designer has to consider is, of course, what are the loading? What are the loads to be considered in my building? Let's say for a particular building. So, interest natin yung building. So, sasabihin ng designer, oh, ito. So, what are the loads? So, these are, of course, relative. Of course, yung mauna dyan is yung architectural plan. The architectural plan will define to you the framing system of your building. Anong ibig sabihin ng framing system? These are made of your beams, columns. Yung beam and column. Sila po. Ang naglalagay dyan yan, in coordination with your architect, is of course, the civil engineer. So that is the first thing that we do. Yung frame, yung three-dimensional frame, gagawin natin saan ilagay yung mga poste, dito ilagay yung beam. And then after that, you start now determining your load. So of course, we mentioned before that there are three very basic and important types of load that you have to consider for a structure. The first thing is dead load. A dead load, that is the weight of your building and everything that it contains. So lahat na mabibigat, kaya patay nga. Dead load, patay na load. Things that will be placed in the building that are stationary or fixed are considered to be dead load. And the second type of loading is the live load. Sabi natin, the live load is dependent on the type of occupancy. So anong ibig sabihin? Kung residential, merong different type of loading. Kung commercial, merong different type of loading. Kung let's say it is a hall that would contain people, o yan, mas mabigat siya. At saka mas mabigat uli kung stock room, nilalagyan ng mga gamit. But of course, these are different type of loadings which are called your live load, which are dependent on the type of use or occupancy. And the third type of loading, which is one of the most critical and overlooked, sometimes hindi pinoconsider. But remember, if your location is the Philippines, you belong to the zone. Ano yung zone na yan? Earthquake zone, typhoon zone, lahat na yata, na-experience na ng Philippines. So, these are called your lateral loads. So, these are your, of course, lateral loads. Yung isa is the wind load. Kaya kung umulan, bumagyo, everything, we call them, of course, your lateral loads. Kasi yung hangin, very high. 250, 300 kilometers per hour. Even, these are yung type na medyo malalakas na pwedeng, what you call, it can blow away your roof. And the second type of lateral loading is called your earthquake type of loading. Yung earthquake naman, yung, we belong to the earthquake zone. How many earthquakes do we receive? Malalaking, malalakas, and then of course, it's extensive when there is damage. So, it's up to you now as the designer to be able now to recognize which are these loads. How to be able now to compute them is one thing. Ayan ang isa. Hindi lang outright, lalabas na lahat. Hindi po. Ikaw rin magko-compute. And then, of course, you have to discriminate which are the loads that are essential or important or are substantial to your structure. Now, the choice is, let's say, Pwede kaya yung lateral load magkasabay yung earthquake at saka bagyo? Pwede, di ba? In a probabilistic sense, it can happen that an earthquake can occur with a super typhoon or a hurricane. So when that happens, yun, madidesign mo kaya yung building mo na in a way na it can resist, let's say, intensity 8 and then a super typhoon with winds of about 300 kilometers per hour. Ayun. So these are the things that the designer should be prepared at. And but before you can start doing that, of course, from this loading, ang gagawin mo dyan, it will translate into computation, analysis of loads ang sabi dyan. So when you do that, you apply it to your frame, yung first na frame na ginawa mo. That kung sinabing frame, ito yung body of the building, no? Ito yung frame parang kung sa katawan natin, skeleton. The frame is the skeleton of your body. So the frame is also the skeleton of the structure. Ano yun ang gamit. So you will apply all of these loads to your frame. And from there, you will design it already accordingly. Sa materials naman, pupunta ka sa strength. But the most important part there is to be able to determine your design loads. Ano yung mga design loads mo. So, design loads, there are three basic criteria na parang sinasabing very basic. You design it against shear, that is the parallel force with respect to a plane, and then you have the normal force, axial type of loading, yung force that is perpendicular to the plane. And then, of course, moment, ayun, bending moment, or flexure as you call it, yung the moment of the couple, yun po ang dinidesign po natin. And then, yung materials na, ikaw na uli mag-decide. Magiging reinforced concrete ba? Magiging steel ba? Magiging timber ba? Magiging pre-stressed? Yun. So, that is the whole process of design. So, ikaw lahat. So, you will notice that as a civil engineer, medyo marami ang dapat nagagawin. Diskarte yan. That's why the analytical type or the analytical frame of your mind has to be developed. Kaya po, there is no single solution in statics, if you can see. I tried to present different approaches, so that you would more or less know. So, the equilibrium of a force system is you have to satisfy something. In a way, it talks about yung mga components of that force, di ba? It redounds to a simple fact that a particular force, let's say, paano ba natin gagawin dito? Let's say, in this scenario, how can this scenario bring us to an equilibrium of force? Sabi na, graphical approach. If you can notice, first is you have here a lighting fixture that weighs 15 Newton. So, linagay ko na yung W, it weighs 15 Newton. 15 Newton. And then you have two cables, AC and DC, which are more or less supporting this 15 Newton. So, if you analyze it, so, read down kasi ito sa free body diagram, yung mga diagram na sinasabi natin. So, ultimately now, what you can see there is you have these forces, the weight is directed vertically down, a magnitude of 15 Newton, and you have two forces which should represent the tension on the cables AC and DC. So, ganyan. So, sa graphical approach, ewan ko kung bakit ayaw yung pen dito. Ang alam ko, may drawing kasi dito noon. But anyway, cut and paste kasi ito na portion. So, that's why I cannot have that. But anyway, so, if you have this, you represent it, di ba, yung downward force, that is the weight. But the most important thing is you should have a scale. Kasi yun po ang graphical. Always there should be a scale. So the weight, 15 Newton, you scale it, 15 centimeter, 15 inch, 15 millimeters, or whatever. And then you have the two forces, scale out 45 degrees. So naka 45 degrees with the vertical, scale it out. Just pencil it, naka 45 degrees. And then of course, connecting that yung 60 degrees with the horizontal. Ayan. So what you have here is a closed polygon or triangle. So in a way, you can now determine graphically how much are the magnitude of your cables at AC and DC. Yan yung exercise na pinapagawa. But anyway, if we go by definition or what is the meaning of equilibrium, so equilibrium is somewhat related to stability. Di ba? I'm in perfect equilibrium. Parang naririnig natin yan. Or I am in I am in a stable condition. So kung sinabing stable, if you have to talk about design, as I was referring you to the procedures on the design of a structure, the most important thing that you can assure your client is whatever you bring out of your design will be stable. Di ba? Gagalaw nga, pero stable naman, di ba? Hindi maiwasan. That's why, when you anticipate, let's say, depending on the location, ano? Kasi yung mga the data that your design what you call parameters can provide has to be location specific, meaning to say wherever your location, that is where you would base some of your design criteria. Let's say Baguio, ano, historically we have experienced a 7.6 intensity na earthquake. So the big question for us designer is, can it happen again? Will it occur again? Di ba? Recurrence interval. Of course, you have to go back to your historical data. But more or less, can a larger intensity earthquake happen? Pwede, ano? So that is a big question for designers. So with equilibrium, that's why if you are now to design, the assumptions are very important. No? Assumptions are very important. So, going back to the definition of equilibrium, it is merely a condition. So, when you say it is a condition where the resultant of a force system is here, direct to the point. So, meaning to say, if you have to look at equilibrium, you have to see to it that all, considering, the first things are applied load. So, when you are talking about structure, you have the structure, you have applied load. The applied load are your external forces, yung sinabi ko, dead load, live load, lateral load. It must satisfy a condition wherein all of the resulting forces are equivalent to zero. So, specifically, if you look at that, the simple equation is simply all the summation of the forces in the system should be equivalent to zero. All the summation of moments should be equivalent to zero. So, designating that in a manner that is relative to an axis. Kasi yun naman, So, all the summation of forces on the x, y, and z should be equivalent to zero. So, these are your three equations of static equilibrium. Ito lang muna, yung sa axis. But, as mentioned here, it should also satisfy that all the moment caused by the force system must be equivalent to zero. That's why, of course, relative to what we have, especially on the components in space, x, y, and z, all the moments about the axis x, y, and z must be equivalent to zero. These are all the equations that has to be satisfied. So, in a sense, if you have coplanar, walang problema, no? X and y axis lang. So, tatlo lang yun. Summation of forces on the x, summation of forces on the y, summation of moments at any point should be equivalent to zero. But when it becomes in space already, components of forces in space, then x, y, and z would come into play. Kaya tatlo dyan. So, depending on that, all the force summation are supposedly zero. And the resultant cannot be a single force, but may be a couple. So, in most cases, we have started out determining the resultant force of a system of forces, di ba? The resulting force of a system of forces. So, when that happens, of course, we have to represent all the forces with a single resultant force. Kaya yun ang ginagawa natin. So, in a way, it's a good representation of all of them. So, rather than catering individually to these forces, individual forces, you will simply represent it with a one single force. Mas madali nga, Just like what we're trying to do. Instead of dealing with rectangular, triangular, concentrated loads, or individual moments, we can simply represent it with a single force. From there on, we can understand how the dynamics of these forces can be represented by a single force. So, resultant ang tawag dyan. Resultant of a component forces. Then, one thing that we have to consider is that if this resultant were the total of all the component forces, then what can or how can we bring it to about to equilibrium? So satisfy natin yung summation of forces at x, summation of forces at y, summation of moments at any point is equivalent to zero. So that is where a series of what you call as reactor, ano? Reaction forces. So if there are actor, these are your applied loads, there should be reactions, ano? So to be able to resist this applied load para maging zero. Diba? If you will allow it, yung applied load lang, saan naman nung reactions? Ano? So there is, should be a system identifying your actors and reactors. So ano yung reactors? These reactors should also be equal in magnitude. So kumbaga, represented it with a single resultant force. So yung magnitude should be equivalent to the magnitude of that resulting force. And of course, not only that, it should be oppositely directed to the resulting force para maging zero. Kung hindi, wala, mag-add up siya. So that is what is very important. But before you can start doing that, as I mentioned, a free body diagram is also essential in showing this relationship. So ano ba ang free body diagram or FBD, yung diagram in itself? We started out already, di ba? If you remember how it is presented in your module, how it is being presented in the lecture, how is it presented in my solution, I can represent it, di ba? So for now, what we were doing is just like free body diagram. It is a diagram to show the interaction between your actors and reactors. Okay, so your action forces and your reaction forces. So this is now the dynamics. Kaya nga medyo na-dismaya ako while checking, ano, because merong nagsasubmit, wala-walang drawing. Pero yung solution niya, R1 is equivalent to, R2 is equivalent, which is R1, which is R2, which is R3, ano? I don't even know, I cannot even relate. Kung sinasabing lever arm, paano niya kinuha yung lever arm? It just shows na nangopya, or, iwan ko, nangopya, hindi niya ginawa, or kinopya, nakalimutan yung diagram. That's why I'm telling you, integral po ang diagram sa solution. If I would have to go back, ano, di ba? Nasa special, ano, nandun ba sa nilagay natin dito sa module? Sabi niya doon, ano, special instruction yata. Under special instruction, let me go back to that. Para ko. Kaya kami. Make manners. Nasa special instruction. Ayan. Module. And then, course introduction. Ito ba? So, basta I remember. If I would have to go back, ano? Introduction naman. But you have here, one of the, which you might forget and which I would have to remind you. Just so that we can see anong pinagsasabi ni Sir. Wala naman yan. Hindi naman nilagay sa instruction kung na nakigday, naglaing kamutan. Oh, anyway, let me find that. Additional guidelines. Andito ba? Special instruction. Parang ma-remember ko yun kasi binasa ko naman kasi bago nung ako ang department head, aging mo ka, basa mo. Diagrams, assignment guide, specific. Oh, yan! Oh. Specific guidelines. You are required in bold print to show your detailed diagram, calculations, solution, and answers to the given problem. Hindi dapat nire-repeat yan. All throughout, kasi sabi namin, dapat binasa yun. In your own handwriting. Huwag kayong magpagawa sa iba. Show all solutions in an organized manner. should be rounded up to the third decimal. We need not repeat that. Repeat that. Okay? So, just like friendly reminder from your old man. So, these are the things that you have to understand. And I guess, as I've been saying and telling you, you have to really, there's no need to be very detailed about that. But of course, you reminder. So, just to remind you, oh, medyo malapit na pala tayo, no? Prelim pa lang. Kaya nga medyo relax dapat para hindi kayo mabigbig lang. Of course, I repeat yung coverage, Module 1 and Module 2. Yung Module 1 is self-study because of the time that we have to spend distributing the load, engaging ourselves with enrollees, finding marami kasing na-dissolve. Like mechanics, magkano ilan yung na-prepare. Tapos, ni-require na 50-50. So, sabi ko nga, nakatipid na nga sa kuryente. Sadya nito. Tapos, anyway. So, definition, summation of forces, moments are all equivalent to zero. How important are free body diagram? Sabi nga rito, the free body diagram is simply a drawing which represents, therefore, the first step in solving problem is to draw a free body diagram. It's quite difficult for me as the evaluator to be able to understand how you are able to come up with the answer if, sorry, so anyway, it's quite difficult for us as evaluators to be able to understand how you're doing your solution kung wala naman diagram. So, ayan ang free body diagram. It is a sketch of an isolated bodies showing all the forces that other bodies exert on an isolated body. So, bakit isolated? So, when you say isolated, what do? The first thing that you have to do is, of course, remove the support condition. So, ano yung mga support condition? Anyway, in-start na natin, I started talking about the different type of support conditions. So, yung hinge, yung roller, those are simple support. In terms of loading, nasabi natin, you have a trapezoidal, rectangular, triangular, concentrated. Even the moment is already a load because it is a couple. Two oppositely directed equal magnitude with a perpendicular distance to it would cause a couple of a moment. Okay? So incidentally, if we can see that, this will now happen. So, what are the things to remember? You isolate the body. Ano ba yung isolate? As I've said, remove all the reactors first. So, mauuna yung mga actors. Actor. Bago yung mga kontrabida. Anong trabaho ng kontrabida? Yung mga reactors. That is, of course, to eliminate all the actors. So, that is the same case. You have actors, that is your loadings. And then the reactors are, of course, your supports, which more or less absorbs yung action ng mga actors or the load that we have. So, you have to sketch, isolate, remove all the reactions. So, as mentioned here, you have the steps. First thing is to sketch the body is drawn, sketch of the body is drawn, assuming that all supports are removed. So, the first thing, you remove sa support. So, simple, roller, fix, mga ganun. Okay? So, it is all removed. After that, applied forces are drawn and labeled on the sketch. So, siguro dapat naka-label and drawn to indicate. Kaya, we're trying our best, of course, to do that in a way because it helps us with our solution and, of course, in showing that we really are we understand what we're trying to do. And then let's say the weight of the body is considered to be an applied force acting on the center of gravity. In statics, madalang yung way, hindi na madalang. You would also be meeting along the way that let's say a particular beam, alam naman natin yung beam is the horizontal element, ano? Horizontal element. So, if the weight of the beam is equivalent to, alam mo na, kung binigay lang doon as to its position, it should be on its center of gravity. Assuming that the section is, of course, homogeneous and, of course, equal all throughout its length all throughout. That's why the center of gravity is where we locate your weight of the object. So, nakita naman natin sa first what example that we had, yung lighting, ano, nakadirect vertical down, and it is of course assumed to be on the center since it's symmetrical on the x, diretso, ano, is center lang yun. Then after that, the support reactions are drawn, so ibalik yung support reactions, but labeled on the sketch. So remember, in representing it, it's not necessarily drawing it to what it is, but we are to represent it with the correct, what you call, correct type of force and reaction. Okay? The thing that you have here, as I've said, that most of your rotation, ewan ko kung dito yung nag-comment, hindi ba sir, sabi ni Singer, upward is positive. Sabi ko, it is not a convention. The assumption of having upward positive, downward positive, clockwise positive, counterclockwise positive is not a convention. It is merely an assumption. So that if the answer comes out as negative, so assuming upward positive, and the resulting force is negative, it indicates that your assumption of positive is not correct, but you have assumed an upward positive, then the resulting force, which is negative, will take a different direction. So downward. Ganun lang yan. That's why, as I've said, the solutions to these problems are not memorized. It has to be analyzed. Yan po ang essence ng civil engineer. You should have a good analytical frame of mind. No? Pero kung sanay kang mag-memorize, ay, medyo wala po dito sa memory work ang civil engineering sa iyo. Siguro, today, I will tell you bluntly, shift ka na lang po. Kasi kung hindi mo ma-develop yan dito, or if you cannot find challenge or even find enthusiasm with these types of problems, then I guess civil engineering is not good. But of course, 75 is not, uh, it's a normal grade. It's a normal grade that you can. Okay? Also, all relevant information such as angles and dimensions are to be shown in your sketch. Kaya may length, distance, mga yan are very important. Of course, I would just like to apologize sometimes, may nakakalimutan, nami-misdraw, minsan nawawala doon, misprint. Kasi po, malapad masyado yung tab ko. So, sometimes I cannot really push the correct letter or sign or number. So, anyway, the angles and dimensions are very important. Di ba? So, especially with the triangle, for cables, the triangle, a member can be designated through, hello, Jasper, rinig ba yung mga aso? Jasper, maingay ba yung aso? Kapitbahay ko yun. Anyway, hindi yung aso ko. Yung aso ko, mga tahimik yun, discipline. So nevertheless, some of these elements can be designated by an angle, di ba? So degrees with the horizontal, with the vertical, or through the z. Or it can be designated through its slope. How does the triangle look? 3, 4, 5. When you say 3, 4, 5, perfect triangle. 3, one leg is 3, the other leg is 4, and the hypotenuse side is 5. Or it can also be described through 1 horizontal, 2 vertical. That would describe to you what the member's direction or position can be. So These are very important elements. Take note of that. You have the element of your structure. You have all the loads placed into, replace the support because you remove them with forces that you could be utilizing. So, as suggested, sabi nga dyan, be neat, clearly labeled, and support reaction must be consistent in table 3.1. Now, the consistency of your support must also be reflective later on. I will discuss to you the support. And then, of course, show only forces that are external to the body, which includes support reactions and the weight. So, external po lang po tayo. What happens internally is already in the province of strength of materials. Kaya nga, strength of the material. So, remember that the structure or the element that you are discussing is also made out of materials. Now, as I've said, one of your role as the designer is to be able to rightly recommend and select the type of material. Timber, steel, reinforced concrete, concrete, pre-stressed, or whatever materials there are in the market. So, should be external. And the weight and internal forces occur in equal and opposite pairs and thus will not appear on the free body. So what happens internally should not be included. External lang po tayo. Okay. So let's go now to the different types of support. So if you remember, partly nadi-discuss natin. Cables, flexible cable, belt, chain, or rope. Lahat yan parehas. They are all in tension. That's why if you will notice the designation is T. So if this body is being pulled towards the right, the tendency, your reaction that is to the cable will be represented with the force T, or an oppositely directed. Of course, the horizontal component from the vertical component, there are already manifested through your tension in the cable. And you should designate it. Of course, the angle is very important. But basically, one of our consideration regarding the scale, the weight of cable, not negligible is when sag occurs. Pero dito, weight of cable is negligible. But of course, depending kasi on the applied force. Siyempre, kung malakas masyado, even the weight, magiging count ito. But usually, if you will notice a sagging of the cable, then the weight is being applied. These are, later on, we will be discussing two types of cable. The parabolic cable and catenary cable. Catenary cables, you have to see to it that the weight is distributed equally on the cable. So medyo irregular, unlike parabolic cable, assuming that the weight is distributed horizontally. That is, the weight of the cable is distributed horizontally, pero dito along the cable length. Kaya susundan mo yung slope mo yan. So that is for cables. For smooth surface, remember So smooth surface, suave. So what happens now if let's say you have here an applied load translated to the wheelbase, and then the surface is of course smooth, which would be differentiated from a rock. So if you will notice, this is the applied load. Kung naka-vertical, you have here a normal force, kaya nga N sinasabi, which is naka 90 degrees with the plane of contact. This is the plane of contact. So basically, a smooth surface can only support a normal force. This is the reaction of your support to an applied load. Ito yung applied load. This is now our reactor. Then it is termed as normal to the supporting plane, which is the contact area between your two bodies. So alisin natin yung support, represent it with a single force N, which is differentiated, of course, to what we call as your rough surface. Yung rough surface naman natin dyan, if you will look at it, it is made out of yung protuberances, yung rough surface. Then we go back to what we have learned from physics, hindi lang normal, it can also have the second component, yung frictional resistance. So if in case you have here, you have a set of force, which is now your normal and your frictional force. To get the resultant, of course, yung connect mo, then that will now be the direction of your resultant. So connecting the normal, the frictional force towards the right, and then if you call that, that is the resultant. This is now your resultant force. So that is now the frictional effect compared to yung smooth. Sometimes the problem states that it is a smooth surface. So a beam is lying on a smooth incline. Makunana. So if it says smooth, yun, normal lang. But if it is lying, especially in our discussion for friction, if it is lying on a rough surface, then frictional resistance and normal force has to be utilized there. The other type na discuss naman natin dito yung roller. Just imagine yourself wearing a roller skates and your mom tells you to carry a 50 kilogram sack of rice, Yung weight, pwede mong i-carry, di ba? Kasi kahit naka-roller ka, you can support it vertically. But if somebody pushes you from the behind, medyo mahihirapan ka, unstable ka na, di ba? Because laterally or sideways, you will move. You can move. But vertically, you can be stable because you can carry it. So that is why that is a single force or reaction for your roller support. Yun lang po. Because it can only resist a vertical. Vertical lang po. Vertical, normal to the plane of support. Siyempre, kung naka-incline yung if the roller is inclined, ganyan, nandyan yung roller, then it should be always normal. Normal. Naka 90 degrees or perpendicular to the support plane. A freely sliding guide is of course yung guide, pwedeng mag-move laterally, left and right. But it can support vertical. That's why there is only one support, normal yan. Naka-normal lang to the incline or to the to the slope or to this plane, supporting plane. So it's just a single force. But it can never prevent movement on the left and on the right. That's why it has no resisting. So eventually, the other type which you have learned, so yung combination ng roller at saka hinge, tawag natin simply supported. So a pin connection is also called your hinge connection. So why? Because to connect this is the member, butasan mo, and then this is your fixed support, which is a hinge, which is the hinge. In between, to connect it, you use a pin. Pin, kaya ang tawag dyan is a pin connection. So if you will observe, if this were the translated force, or this is the force that is distributed to your element, this element, structural element, naka-incline, you will notice that a pin support can resist both horizontal and vertical. Kaya ngayong reaction, take note also, the direction are oppositely directed. Reactor na sila. Reactor or reaction. They are acting as against the effect of an applied load, which is inclined. So it can resist both horizontal and vertical. But it cannot resist, of course, a rotation. Kasi parang pin yan. If you can just imagine. I don't know if you can just imagine. Yung tingnan na lang ninyo yung mga hinges ng doors, cabinets, windows. Di ba? If you can see it, you can open it vertically, then you can push it. But a moment, it cannot resist yung turning effect, rotating. The pin will move freely kasi nakakabit lang yan if you could just imagine. So it cannot totally resist kasi magta-turn lang yung pin. So the pin not free to turn component. Pin to free to turn, sabi yan, a freely hinged pin connection is capable of supporting a force in any direction, but a pin not free to turn, kapag na-fix na yan, if it is fixed the element, then it can possibly resist. But of course, the problem is that it would have to include a moment resisting pin, ang sabi dyan. So the pin connection, you have to be very careful about this because in steel design, you would mention, the problem will state that not only is it merely a pin, but it can also resist what we call a moment resisting force. Okay? So, mga yan. The third, I mean, the most, ay, the last one is what you call a built-in or fixed support. Ito naman, it can support three actually as compared to ito, no? Tignan mo, tatlo na ito. Ito yung dalawa. So, medyo kasi ang problema, you have the pin which has to carry that moment, or torsional moment, or whatever. But a fixed support or a built or fixed support can resist three. Yung horizontal, I mean the vertical, the horizontal, and moment. Kaya tatlo po. Kaya kung sinabing fixed or built-in, it can resist three. Yan. Pinasok mo parang sa wall yan. It is also here yung actual, ano? This is a wall and then you weld the structural element to it. Fixed ang term dyan. So this is also a something like a fixed. So again, go over that and then so maybe about time. So anyway, I'll just see you on Thursday and on Friday. Okay? Any clarifications? Wala pa? Baka may paso. Uy, 33 na tayo. Sige, habang mas maaga. Okay? Yun ang masama. Okay, okay. So, if there are no questions, I'll see you tomorrow, Thursday, and on Friday. Just keep abreast of any notification that we will have. Okay? So, bye-bye for now. And I'll prepare for the other class. Kasi kung late ako dun,
Thank you, sir.
atrasado rin. You're
Thank you,
welcome.
sir.
Keep